Oh man. So Georgia Republicans enacted a voter system that they claimed would prevent fraud and safeguard the election, but the exact opposite has now happened. Right? Since its recent rollout, the system has had multiple security flaws that increased the potential for bad actors to commit fraud and readily supplied voters' personal information. And specifically, what I'm talking about here is a new portal launched by Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, that lets people cancel a voter registration online with a few clicks of a button, with the goal there being to help people update their voter registration status if they moved out of state or no longer qualify to vote, as well as, to assist family members in removing relatives who have died from the voter rolls. But very notably here, the portal doesn't require a person filling out a request to say that they're trying to cancel their own voting registration or that of a dead relative. In fact, you don't have to identify yourself at all when making the request, meaning that anyone can fill out a form requesting to cancel the registration of anyone else as long as they know the personal details required. Right? To start the cancellation request, all a person needs is a voter's name, date of birth, and county of residence, all things that can be easily found online for a lot of people. Though notably, to finish, they must provide either the last 4 digits of the voter's social security number or their driver's license number, which obviously are much more secret. And after that, once the request is sent, county voter registration officials will receive a notification and remove the voter from the rolls. Now, notably here, a spokesperson for Raffensperger's office did tell reporters that postcards will be sent to people notifying them that they will be removed unless they respond. But you have experts there noting that there is no law in Georgia that explicitly says a voter's registration has to be reinstated if it's canceled by an unauthorized person on the portal. So as a result, critics have argued that the requirement to provide a social security or driver's license number is the only actual obstacle preventing bad actors from canceling anyone's voter registration. Right? And so that is an issue on its own, especially given, how much of a person's information gets leaked by companies constantly. But also it is especially concerning here because the rollout of this portal has been riddled with multiple glitches that allowed people to get around that one single deterrent. And in fact, shortly after the site was launched, the Associated Press found a flaw that, quote, allowed people to access a voter's date of birth, driver's license number, and last 4 numbers of a social security number. So in other words, not only was the government giving out super sensitive information, it was providing the exact information needed to cancel a registration. And specifically, the glitch took place when people who didn't have the personal information they needed clicked on an option to print out a copy of a sworn statement requesting cancellation. And according to the Georgia Senate Minority Leader, who personally tested the system with her own information, all you would need to know is a voter's birthday to get in and request the statement that would then give you all the data necessary to cancel their registration. Now, with that said, a spokesperson for Raffensperger's office said that this massive flaw had only lasted less than an hour and it was quickly fixed. But notably, that's not the end of the problems here, because a few days later, The Current reported that even though the website no longer printed out personal information about voters, it could still be found in the computer code that the portal sent to some users' browsers. And again, we saw officials within the Georgia Secretary of State's office saying that the issue had been fixed quickly and that only a couple hundred people had visited the site before it was resolved. But also, that's not where this ridiculous saga ends, because about a week after that, ProPublica reported that a cybersecurity researcher had discovered, quote, a serious security vulnerability that would have allowed anyone to submit a voter cancellation request for any Georgian with just their name, birth date, and the county they lived in. And adding that the bug would, quote, allow any user of the portal to bypass the screen that requires a driver's license number and submit the cancellation request without it. And in a video shared with the outlet, the researcher showed that when the portal asked for a driver's license, all they had to do was right-click to inspect the browser's HTML and delete the few lines of code for that request. And from there, they were just able to successfully submit the cancellation request. Now, of course, again, Raffensperger's office said they had addressed the issue after it was flagged, but you have experts just absolutely stunned by how serious this specific flaw was, and as a result, some have speculated that this likely isn't the only issue with the portal. With Zach Edwards, for example, a senior threat researcher at the cybersecurity firm Silent Push, telling ProPublica that the issue was, quote, as bad as any voter cancellation bug could be, noting that it would have been so simple for someone to automate cancellation requests to get around the portal security and submit thousands of them. Adding, at this point, we should assume there are other subtle bugs that could have potentially serious impact. And that's something that's been echoed by others who note that elections-related websites have a long history of easily exploitable security failures. And I mean, specifically, Georgia itself also has a history of compromising sensitive voter data, which is why you have Democrats and voting rights groups arguing that the portal could be abused by bad actors who could submit mass challenges to deny people the right to vote. And that's actually a very real threat in Georgia because this portal isn't just a one-off, right? It is part of a much broader effort by Republicans to mass purge voter rolls in response to Trump's false claims that he lost the 2020 election due to fraud. Because specifically, pro-Trump conservatives have argued that outdated rolls can lead to voter fraud, claiming that people could use invalid registrations to cast fraudulent votes and arguing that Georgia has been too slow to update rolls and remove people who died or are no longer eligible because they moved. But truly, very few cases of illegal out-of-state voting have been confirmed in Georgia or really anywhere else in the country for that matter. Right? Trump's infamous claim that 5,000 dead people voted in Georgia, that's been debunked, with officials actually finding that just 4 ballots for dead people were cast passed, and all were identified and remedied. But what we've seen is that hasn't mattered to many Republican officials in Georgia who have made purging voter rolls a key element of the highly restrictive laws they've implemented to safeguard their elections against this imagined threat of widespread fraud. Because if you don't know, back in 2021, Georgia became one of the first states to enact sweeping voter restrictions, passing one of the strictest laws the country's still seen to date, with one of the single most consequential provisions of that law being that it made it easier to kick people off voter rolls by allowing citizens to contest the eligibility of any voter in their county through unlimited voter registration challenges. What we've seen is that's resulted in a wave of mass challenges to voter registrations, with it being widely reported that at least 100,000 have been brought since the law was passed. But it's not concerned neighbors that are bringing these challenges. This is a coordinated effort by a small group of far-right groups and pro-Trump activists bolstered by his false claims. In fact, according to ProPublica, nearly 90% of those 100,000 challenges have been brought by just 6 right-wing groups. Now, with that said, most of those challenges have been rejected, with officials repeatedly saying that the allegations are bogus or that the challengers don't have enough evidence. But some have been accepted, and experts say that counties have been handling these challenges inconsistently, sometimes in ways that might violate federal law. And when those challenges are approved, the voters in question are forced to jump through hoops to prove their eligibility, creating barriers to voting and leaving many feeling harassed or intimidated. But despite that, Republicans have been expanding the ability to bring these challenges ahead of the 2024 election. Because in addition to this new portal, the state's Republican lawmakers also recently approved another wave of election restrictions. With this, including one law that makes it easier to bring voter registration challenges by expanding the criteria that can be used to remove people from voter rolls. And so with all this, we've seen Democrats, voting rights groups, and others pushing back, saying this is all just a scheme to suppress and disenfranchise voters. And many here are arguing that these mass challenges are a voter intimidation tactic meant to discourage people from going to the polls, create unnecessary hurdles, and remove eligible voters from the rolls. Also, you have others claiming that Republicans are trying to sway the election in their favor by targeting Democratic voters, noting that these challenges disproportionately impact voters of color, especially Black voters. And so the super alarming issues with the portal, they've just heightened those concerns even more, which is also why we saw the NAACP writing a letter to the DOJ condemning the system as an act of voter suppression. And they're calling on the agency to investigate and take the steps necessary to reverse any voter registrations canceled as a result of this recently implemented practice. What's more, the nonprofit Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law also sent Raffensperger's office a cease and desist order arguing that the portal violates federal law and demanded that it be taken down. But for now, especially with the election getting closer and closer by the day, we're gonna have to see what happens and if there are legal challenges. Especially because whatever goes down here, it's gonna be incredibly consequential, and not just for the people of Georgia. Because while yes, Georgia has been described as the ground zero for these Republican-led mass voter roll purges, Trump allies have since been deploying similar efforts in other key swing states. And so if this portal proves successful in Georgia's efforts here, we could see similar systems implemented elsewhere.